Welcome to the One Big Thing podcast, where inspiration meets transformation. I'm Steve Campbell, your host, and I invite you to embark on this exhilarating journey with me. Are you searching for that extra spark, that push to propel you in the right direction? Look no further. The One Big Thing is all about bringing you incredible guests from diverse backgrounds. So picture this: professional athletes, visionary business leaders, fellow podcasters, and even awe-inspiring stay-at-home moms who are all conquering life's challenges. Get ready to seize your moment of greatness. Don't miss out. Subscribe and follow the One Big Thing podcast today. Well, welcome back to the One Big Thing podcast. I am your host, Steve Campbell. Folks, got another exciting episode for you today. Thank you to all of you that had followed up from the episode with Peter, where we talked about conflicts and dealing through resolution and how it's never been easier to put up walls of isolation and set up these so-called boundaries with individuals when we know in reality there's certain conversations that we should be having with the people that we love, family, friends, what have you. So to all of you that reached out, thank you for that. As I said, I'm very excited about today's episode. I think we're going to learn a lot from my guest on this show. I'm just excited to jump right into it today. So I want everybody to help me to welcome Allison Minutillo to the One Big Thing podcast. And Allison, I want to give you the space right here at the beginning. This was a fun connection as I had cast vision for the One Big Thing, and I reached out to family, friends, people that I knew, connections, who do you know, in your name came up from a good friend of mine, and she said, you have to interview Allison. So we've been kind of going back and forth via text messages, via emails, and I'm just excited to have you on the show. So do you want to take a couple minutes here right at the beginning to kind of let us know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It is such a special platform to share your stories and the stories of others. So just very grateful to be here.
Absolutely.
So I, too, was a fellow podcast host. So we kind of connected over that and love being on that to tell my particular story and all the things that I've learned along my journey. But I grew up in the world of marketing, and being on stage was always a big part of my background. So music theater and competitions and singing and dancing and all the things. I just loved the energy that came from the diversity of people embodying someone else on that stage and just having so much courage to do those things in front of big audiences. So that turned into a career in marketing where you're constantly presenting and you're putting yourself out there and you're coming up with big ideas and you're being creative, and tapping all of that energy across different disciplines has been a huge, huge part of my story, which has led me along the path towards leadership. And over the past 5 years, I've really learned that is my sweet spot on this planet, is understanding what it takes to lead, the discipline of leading, the reflection that goes into leading, the personal growth that goes into leading, the willingness to change and evolve and listen and be a student of it and be a student of yourself. So that journey led me towards having also a podcast that was an outlet of mine to process all the things I was learning and hearing from others and just get into it with people and understand and break down meaningful topics, and then also practice those things in my day-to-day career. Where I am now, I'm at a company called Primacy. We are a digital experience agency, and I lead a team around marketing services. So mainly the omni-channel strategies to execute a client's vision. So paid, earned, owned, shared media, how all of those things work within a digital strategy or an overarching business strategy to get them to where they want to go.
Yeah, I love that. We're gonna have a lot of fun on this conversation today too, as well, because marketing and telling stories is a big part of, as a podcaster, as a creator, right? This is an interview style show, but you're still telling a story, whether it's spoken word, whether it's video, whether it's something you see on social media or a print ad in the paper. There is always a means to an end when you're creating content. And what I loved is that I'll be honest, people suggest people I should interview all the time to me. You still got to go do your research and due diligence. And when I actually discovered who you were, my immediate response was, she's a boss. And I was just curious to learn more myself. So one of the initial questions I have, and then we'll kind of get into more of your stories as we go through it, but leadership, was this always something that you knew you were passionate about, or was leadership something that was more of a self-discovery as you were, kind of put into various roles, and kind of just, do you want to talk about how that developed?
Yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't something I always knew. I knew that I had a unique mix of skill sets. I had a unique mix of being unafraid of hard conversations. I've never, ever, ever shied away from something difficult. In fact, I lean into those things and I crave it. I crave complexity. So all of those traits that actually now I understand make up a great leader were always there, but I never used the term leadership to define that path that I was on. It took having the right opportunities to present it to me and for me to step up into those things, which was a later lesson that I realized no one gave this to me. I earned this
Right.
path, right? But at that time, it was like you see the opportunity in front of you to step up into a void, and that void was leadership in a particular area. And each time I would step up into it, it would present the next opportunity of a void in a leadership area. And that kind of compounded on itself until ultimately I became the president of my last agency, um, in the ultimate leadership position. That was an absolute dream of mine along that journey. And when I got there, the view was a lot different than I expected it to be. And so the one big thing, as you had me reflect on this, was a really difficult lesson to learn about balancing your priorities. Who do you want to be when you wake up and show up? How do you want to lead? How you lead from within and help the people around you shape that, but not define it for you. There was just a whole slew of unpacking that one big thing, but it all centered around getting ultimately to the top and realizing, hang on a second, like what what do you really want? And is this it? Right?
Yep.
So there was a lot of self-reflection going into being on this podcast. So excited to dig into that actually.
Well,
So
and we'll unpack it all, right? We're all like one big onion, right? And my kids watch Shrek and all these things, and so you hear about onions, and there's layers to them. And I think whether you are, as I say in my intro, a professional athlete, a fellow podcaster, a business leader, a stay-at-home mom, I think that and you and I didn't discuss this at the beginning of the show, but what I have learned in my life is that there are certain things, there's an expectation for how things are going to go. And then there's the real reality of the experience of once it actually happens. In this, you may not necessarily identify with Allison as a leader or a podcaster, but you're a human being. If you've ever been married, you have an expectation of what your wedding day is going to be like. And then your wedding day comes. And I know for me, my wife, guest episode number 1, Stephanie, she's a killer. She's phenomenal. We talked about our life and marriage, but our wedding day was a blur. And I remember that all of the details leading up to that wedding and all the things you planned for, you actually get there and you forget about it. And we didn't even get to eat on our wedding day. And so there was this real, expectation, but the experience was very different. And sometimes if you're not careful, the experience could be so different from the expectation that maybe you can think you did it wrong. You could have done something better. If you've ever had children, the first time that you're thrust into a delivery room, you think you're going to, at least for me personally, be this hero, husband, dad, swoop in, and you have this experience of having your first child, and it's different than maybe what the expectation was when you come home. So I got to imagine that we all are kind of living in this space where what we hope to expect of being the leader, climbing the corporate ladder, owning our own business, leading from the front versus the experience that actually happens in that process is sometimes where maybe a lot of us get confused as to, did I miss something? Did I do something wrong? Whether it's the pinnacle success of motherhood, fatherhood, being married, what have you. So I don't know if that was kind of your experience in leadership and the rise to the top.
you're almost blinded by the idealistic view of what it is you're working towards. And it's just a really fascinating thing to live through because you're talking to me on the backside of like some major decisions.
Yeah.
If you had talked to me on the front side of these major decisions, I wouldn't have seen it so clearly. because there was so much good in it and so much that I loved that I could not imagine not doing every day.
Yeah.
That was shielding, like that idealism aspect of it was hindering me from seeing the things that were not healthy for me in my life. So it's not like you get to this, at least in my personal journey, you don't get to this day where everything becomes clear, it all sucks, and then you just quit and move on to something else. That's not what it's like. It's this really complex set of emotions that takes a huge, huge, strong support system, both at work and outside of work, to talk through all of the moments. And I'll share with you a story that was my husband breaking through to me. And he could see the torment on my face of this decision. Do I walk away from being a president of this agency, or do I stay? And if I stay, what does that look like? How does that affect our family? How does it affect me and my mental health? How does it affect the organization? If I leave, same filters apply. And he just saw it like I was just distant. I was so consumed by the decision that was looming over me, and something that I think I knew I needed to do was walk away for the better of everybody, even though that meant big public display of stepping away from a job that you had earned, and the questions about why would you do that, blah, 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 and the potential havoc that would wreak. But he looked me dead in the eye and just said one simple thing. He said, "For what? For what? Why are you staying? If it's this hard to make this decision, and there's so many things that are taking down your spirit and your health, and you're not prioritizing picking up the kids on time and working out and all the things that actually make you a better leader, what is it for? It's not for money. It's not for, there is no finish line, right? There is none. It's about every single day and being really comfortable in your skin every single day. And that one question, I will never forget that question, because he was 100% right. That if I couldn't answer the for what in a way that was meaningful to myself and my family, then it wasn't the right decision to stay there. And the next week, I made the decision to step down.
Yeah. And if you're out there and you're married, Bradley talked about it in our Peloton episode talking about his stroke. Our spouse plays such a significant role in all of our lives. And obviously, there can be marriages that you're going through some tough times, and there's seasons for that. And I totally get that. But I married my best friend, and her words cut like a knife, both good and bad. And you can have a colleague, a mentor, a fellow influencer ask you that question, and it carries some weight. But when it's your spouse, it doesn't have to be screamed. It doesn't have to be shouted. It doesn't have to be presented to you. But it is the simple, loving companion that's asking you something that makes you all of a sudden stop dead in your tracks. And I remember for me personally, prior to the role that I'm in now with my business partners in my old corporate job, 6 years into my job, I was putting out more fires and dealing with more drama every single day with colleagues, not even with clients. And the person that I was bringing it home to every night was my wife. And, because like, who else am I going to share this with? There's nobody else I'm going to call on the way home.
The brunt of your real feelings about your day to day.
Yep.
And they shoulder a lot of burden with being the still person. It's famous when you have friends. It's like, you don't give them, if you're a good friend, you don't tell them who to date, who not to date. Even if you think their boyfriend is a jerk, right? You don't tell them they're a jerk. You're going to push the friend further away from you. Because if they're in love with that thing, if they're in love with that job that you absolutely hate as the spouse, to be a good partner means you stick it out in this thick and thin, and you help them and support them. You don't tell them what decision they need to make. It ultimately has to be their decision. Because if he had been pushing me to leave earlier than I was ready, I would have thought he wasn't being supportive of my career trajectory, right?
Sure.
But he didn't. He never told me which decision to make. He just positioned it in a way that allowed me to see things far clearer than anybody else could do for me. And he knew that I needed that. I needed the push that was on a deeper reason to make the decision than just my day-to-day sucks. Because like I said in the beginning, like I'm not opposed to a challenge. It wasn't the challenge that was the thing. It was the conflict between who I wanted to be, who I was surrounding myself with, how I was leading. And that just wasn't what I thought it was going to be at the top.
Well, to somebody who's out there that's, listening to this show, maybe they're kind of where you are. I don't know where they might be in that thought process, but maybe they know there's a major life change coming. Now, they may not own a business, but maybe they just feel like, man, where they are right now is not good for them. They know they need to do something, but fear keeps them longer maybe than they should be. I am very honest that with this show, I am all about getting extremely practical. I don't want guests to come on, or even myself, and tell people, if you're not happy, just take a leap of faith. That's not helpful to anybody because there's family, there's kids, there's a lot of things. So I don't even know what you did. We haven't even talked about it. But when you're trying to think through these big life decisions, was there anything from a practical standpoint that you did to sort through your feelings, to weigh the benefits, the options? What did that look like for you personally?
So in the thick of when I was unhappy, I wasn't, because it wasn't the entire time, right? It started to change, and I could feel that change, and I could feel I needed to prioritize my own mental health and just be able to think clearly of like, what are my own thoughts versus what are the thoughts of someone else around me? What I turned to was running, and I am a goals person. I set a goal in front of me, and that is what I'm going to accomplish. No matter how much sacrifice, no matter how much effort, that is just who I am. So that goal for me was a half marathon. It was my first half marathon. The furthest I had ever run before that was like 6 miles, maybe. So a half to me was a really big deal.
Sure.
It's 13.1 miles. I had heard and done a bunch of research that the Hartford half marathon is just an amazing, incredible event. And I had a support system of 2 of my dearest girlfriends, and they were like, let's do this. Allison, you got this. Let's do it. We can go on runs in the morning as both of our husbands work on the weekends during football season. So we were able to prioritize the time together, get some time alone, go on some long runs, enjoy friendship as we're working towards this goal. So as I was doing all of these practice runs, I started seeing extremely clearly the parallels between training for something as big as a half marathon and what I was experiencing in leadership.
Sure.
And there were a lot of times where I would go on the next longest run. So when you're training for something that long, you start adding on miles. It's a progression. It's like 12 weeks. There's a bunch of different training regimens. But the one I did was about 12 weeks long. And you start out small. It's like you run 3 miles. Then the next time you run 3.5. Then you run 4. And you keep building on it.
Yep.
And that was very similar to the journey I was on at that time. I just kept building, kept seizing the next opportunity and adding on to it. It wasn't this overnight, like, okay, you're a director of something and now you're the president of the organization. It was overnight successes that were built upon. And at each milestone, you get this adrenaline rush. You get this dopamine hit that is like no other. It was my ambition calling and being fueled. So every time I got into the next role, it was like, hell yeah, we did this. I got to the next thing. It just became these like ultimate milestones, right?
Yep.
And then there are runs that are not so fun. So when I got to when I was around 8 miles, some days you wake up and you're like, I can't even get through this first mile. Like it's literally impossible for me to think about getting through that mile. And those were some days that I was feeling at work. I was just like, how am I going to get through some of these conversations I have to have today?
Yeah.
How am I going to do all the things? Be a mom, be a friend, be a sister, be a good wife, be a good business partner, be a good leader to the organization, be a good partner to my clients. Like there was just so much that felt so hard and messy. And yet that day would get done and the run would get done. And the next day we would come back and it's like, you better train. You can't give up, right? You can't just give up at mile 8 if you want to run a half marathon. You need to get to mile 13.1.
Sure.
So all of these things to say, like, as I was running and I was thinking about these parallels, it helped me take the abstract and turn it into things I would practice every day, including lace up those shoes the next day, girlfriend. Lace up those fall booties, whatever it is that you need to do to get back at it. Don't be woe is me. That is not the leadership role you are in.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad for yourself. Figure out how to lead differently. What am I going to do differently on this next run tomorrow? Do I hydrate ahead of time? Did I eat enough beforehand? Did I get a good night's sleep the night before? It was almost the exact same journey. But the big thing, as I'm thinking about this One Big Thing podcast to get to today, when I got to mile 13.1 on the day of the race, I had beat 2 of my goals. One of those goals was to finish in 2.5 hours. And I finished 20 minutes faster than that goal, which I was shocked by. And the other goal was that I finished the entire race without walking one time. And awesome. I did not think either of those were possible. But as I'm crossing that finish line, instantly this runner's high kicks in where you're like, let's sign up for the next half. And that stopped me in my tracks. And I wrote myself a note that day and was like, it is not about the destination. It is not about getting to the title of presidency. It's about getting to that position and then opening up the next chapter and getting to that position and reflecting how you feel in that moment to say, is this what I thought it would feel like? Is this goalpost now moving? Did I unlock the next chapter of my own journey?
Yeah.
And in that case, in the marathon, it's like half marathon. It's like, do I think I'd be capable of a full marathon? It just taught me so quickly, so vividly, in such a realistic context that if we think our goal is to get a particular position, we're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people out there. I love that story. Congratulations to you, by the way, of being able to complete that, but also the realness of there are definitely moments and times when we don't feel like doing what we're supposed to do. And this is something that when I live my life out in front of people, I'll use my social media platform to post real things that I even have to think through and struggle with. And this idea of adulting and this idea of feelings are great, but feelings can be extremely misleading because your brain can tell you that you don't feel like taking care of the kids. You don't feel like going to work today. You don't feel like doing the laundry. But what I think is great about your story, and it kind of goes back to what Brett talked about in episode 3, this concept of crawl, walk, run. We have kids, so we know what it's like raising babies. You would never take your brand new baby from holding them in your arms and expecting them to sprint. And yet we as adults have this Herculean mindset all the time that we're going to go from where we are today and just all of a sudden get to where we want to be. And when it doesn't happen in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a year, we somehow can feel lesser than. And we all have this clock internally, especially when you get into your 30s and 40s, that you're supposed to be at this certain place at life and have certain things and certain statures and certain salaries. And it's like, where did all this come from? Because where's the joy in the process? And what I loved about your story was just the reality that there was days you didn't want to go, but you did. And that culminated to you crossing that finish line and feeling like, what else I can do? And I think what I've learned in my experience is even in the small details of my life, if I can succeed in one habit and do that one habit well, it's crazy how then when I'm faced with a situation that has nothing to do with that habit, it could just be flossing every day. I'm going to floss every single day. And when I do that and I get into a tough situation at work, I think about that moment and how I was able to overcome that. But the flip side is when we quit or we give up on every small decision in our life, we begin to quit on everything in our life. And so even just go ahead.
It's the reason why many people give up on their goals, because they're not thinking about, okay, it's one thing to set the goal, get the job, finish the half marathon, get the promotion, whatever, have a happy family, right? Mm-hmm. It's another thing to be methodical about What do you need to do? You personally need to do to get to that goal, because no one is going to get you to that goal but yourself.
Yeah.
There are influencers and supporters, absolutely, that are critical along the way. But the only person, say it's a fitness journey, the only person that can get out of bed in the morning to work out is you.
Yeah.
The only person who can keep leading an organization is you. The only person who can fold the laundry is you, right? Like all the things that make up running a household, running a business, they are really tedious, consistent tasks that go into building towards that long-term goal. So you can't give up. Like you can't. No one else is going to do it for you. And I think it's the one place where people really get it wrong, because it's not that their goal is wrong. It's that they haven't thought through the action items that they are going to take, that they are responsible for, not anybody else, in order to achieve that goal.
Well, and I think for you and your story, and even just successes that I've had in my career too, we can sometimes try to give ourselves a pass in a way that we're not supposed to. And what I mean by that is, if you absolutely crush it with clients at work and you did your job, you helped the business grow, you won today, and then you come home and your mom, your dad, they're not clients, they're your kids. And you look around and you have a dirty room and there's dishes in the sink. It's sometimes very easy to fall into the trap. Well, I did what I was supposed to do today, so I'm not going to do that. When in reality, that's stewardship. You have to take care of that too. And I think if we're not careful, I jotted down this thought too. Depending on what you do for a living and who you interact with, I think it's very easy to have clients and customers that love what you do for them. They'll literally do whatever you ask them to do. And you come home and you have a spouse who's not your client. They're not your customer. They're your best friend. And when that same, I don't want to say level of appreciation, but what worked during the day, when you told the story and they responded, "Oh, Allison, we love you're so good at what you do," or you sent that email and they, signed up to become a new client with you. And then you go home, and not that you ever try to do the same things you do with customers or clients or in your day-to-day with your spouse or your kids, but your work reaches a habit. So you think that I'm going to compliment my spouse or say something to my kids in a way that worked during the day, and all of a sudden you're met with immediate feedback. You're met with this disruption, you're met with this conflict, and all of a sudden it can be it can create a lot of insecurity with what you do for a living out in the world, what works with people, and then the same way you try to talk to your spouse in the same way or your kids, and it's not met with the same reception, it's not met with the same enthusiasm. Those can be mini crisis moments where, if we're not careful, we can sometimes then want to only be doing work-related things because of how they make us feel, and almost become a shell of ourselves around our family, because we can misdiagnose that they don't appreciate us the same way that our staff does or that our clients do. And so I don't know if you've ever had experience in that realm personally, where just the balance between home life with your spouse and your kids versus just being on top of the world every day in business. Do you have any kind of experience in that space and how you've just had to work through some of those things?
Yes. It's probably the hardest part of the whole journey, was being a new mom through it all. So my oldest now is 6, my youngest is 3. So when I was on this path, I was literally becoming a mom for the first time and figuring out what that meant to be a mom of 2 for the first time and a mom of young boys for the first time after having grown up with only girls. So all of that, I did not give myself grace.
Mm.
I did not show myself kindness. I was very hard on myself the entire time because I was so in pursuit of what I wanted to be and who I wanted to become. And I was killing it in the career lens. But there was the version of me that was left for them when I got home was abysmal. I was a shell. Like you said, when you said shell of yourself, I very much understand what you're talking about, because you're at work, you are able to handle it all with ease, or at least that's what it looks like, right? You take everybody's problems as your own. You can see solutions and complexity. You can hear things and dissolve and resolve conflict very quickly. Like all of those things, I just was in my element. And yet at home, what my kids were asking of me was just my undivided attention.
Mm-hmm.
But when that wasn't what they were getting from me, because I was distant or because I was thinking about leadership and the complexity of what was on my plate and my mind at all times of all days, what they got was someone who wasn't fully present. Even though I was physically there, I wasn't fully present. And that results in behaviors like screaming and yelling and hitting and kicking, like all of the typical signs that they're not getting what they need. And it was only until my husband said that statement of for what, that it all came crashing to a halt. Like, yeah, you can be killing it over here, but is that the version of life that we want for ourselves? Because what I've found now, after having stepped down, and I'm still in a very senior role, is that title doesn't matter whatsoever. That doing what you want to be doing and things that are fulfilling to you matter, that you have something of yourself left over to give to your family at the end of the day matters, that you do not feel guilty for missing t-ball practice. It matters. All of those little things matter and also contribute to being an exceptional leader the next day. So where I would just completely shut all that stuff out and just say, I can't go pick him up today. Can you just go pick him up and put that burden on my husband? The picking up, I love picking up my kids. Right? So it's like those are treats in the day. And I was seeing them as like a part of the schedule until now I've like completely looked at life differently, having lived through this whole thing. And you can have it all. You can be a great leader. You can be a great wife. You can be a great mom. It's not always equal every day.
No.
But you can work towards a well-balanced life that works for everybody, including yourself.
I think what's challenging too is sometimes the road that we're on at this stage of our life can seem fairly lonely. I would have to imagine people that listen to the One Big Thing podcast at their core are fairly motivated, disciplined, get out there and do something. You're listening to a podcast because you are trying to acquire some skill set, some knowledge that can help you. Our generation gets labeled with a whole lot of labels. And I think what's cool about this conversation is you're not talking about not doing anything as an adult that you should be doing to do the things like working out and taking care of yourself because work's not for you. You're not saying that. You're fighting for taking care of yourself in the midst of being successful. And I think maybe that's where a lot of listeners are finding themselves today, which is, you say that titles aren't important. We were all taught from young kids in middle school and high school, our parents, that when you think about generational type things, our parents came from generations where their parents maybe never said I loved you in life and never were there for them and didn't attend sports events. And so when our parents all had us in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, our parents were mostly very involved in our life. I remember my dad was at every single game. And then you had middle school guidance counselors and high school guidance counselors telling all of us in our generation, you can be whatever you want to be. And I don't think they were lying to us, but now we get to this place where in this pursuit of something that we can't even clearly define, we want to be successful. And maybe for you, successful is being money. Maybe it's a title. Maybe it's owning a business. But if we're not careful, we can constantly be shortchanging the season of life that we're in by saying, I will be happy when I get the title. I will be happy when I have the money. And to you as about a parent, I think the hardest thing for me, obviously, go ahead.
That's that finish line. It's the evaporating finish line.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to be happy when you cross the finish line. You're just not. Right. And I thought that I would be. And I thought that like once I just get to the half, I could tell myself I could do anything. It's like, that's not what happened. But you have to be willing to learn about you to get to that next level. Like, and that's where when we've been talking about our spouses on this, this is like a spouse appreciation podcast. Maybe that's what the title should be. But it's like the conversations that you have with them about what is it that you both are working towards.
Sure.
For us, it was like someday, not right now, someday when our kids are older and we don't have daycare payment anymore, we want to buy a little house in Florida. That's where my husband grew up. That's where some of our best friends in this world are, some of our family. And we'd like to earn enough to invest in a property down there, right?
Love it.
That's not right now. But on that pursuit of that, it's like, okay, well, what are the steps we need to take between now and that? Those steps don't equal giving up every minute of your life for work.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. And so when you can have those realistic conversations about where are you today, where are you going, and what are the steps to get there, it'll actually surprise you how little you have to sacrifice to get there of yourself. Self-sacrifice, if that makes sense.
And especially if you do it together. If we're not careful, we can be trying to one up or compete with our spouse, even though, we're not verbally saying that unconsciously. If, in my case, my wife was a stay-at-home mom for many years. So it would seem like maybe my stories were more important because of going out and earning business and building a salary. And so maybe her stories weren't as important, but fighting to realize that even if she's home with kids during the day, that's her life in this season of life right now. And so the whole conversation can't be about me and what I'm going through. We have to be a team. And it took us literally a decade of being married to think we've always loved each other, but to really start thinking together, into talking together, not at each other, but just getting out in the open things that we were concerned about, being honest with each other, looking at our finances together, looking at how we were raising parents. And, when an ugly part of you comes out as a mom or a dad, not to chastise the other parent in front of the kids and be like, hey, don't do that, but really be like, hey, what happened earlier today? Like that wasn't you. You seem like you got pretty hot. Like, let's talk about that. What happened? And I think that's the hardest part, right? When you go into a workplace every day and you're appreciated, you solve problems, you add value to the bottom line of a business, you add value to clients, and then you come home. And in my case, I have 4 children under 7 years old. I have 2 absolutely beautiful identical twin girls. And I almost verbatim, I'm not even kidding, at nighttime when I put them to bed, my wife and I will walk into the room at the same exact time. And my one daughter will say, Daddy, I don't want you. And yeah, I know it's a phase, but boy, it's not fun. And it's very easy in that moment to go, okay, and walk out, but it breaks your heart. And then you think about the next day, I'm going to go into a place where it's not that I'm loved at work, but people want me around, right? And if you're not careful, our kids are such anomalies. Our kids, you can't follow a process and have a program managing tool like you would at work that tells you what you should work on this day and make sure you get this done with your kids, because dinner time isn't always the same. Going to the store isn't always the same. And sometimes you're met with these moments where with your kids, things happen beyond your control that make you act differently than you would. And I think that's, for a lot of us, maybe the troubling part is when parts of us come out that we didn't know existed in us that make us feel like, man, where did that come from? And so even as you've gone through, for you personally, this transition, uh, what do you think has helped you the most? I know you talked about appreciating pickup time. Was it that you made the big life decision, you walked away, so that just freed up your emotional capacity? Or were there just things that you started to like work through in your mind that have now allowed you to maybe appreciate things that maybe you took for granted?
I think one of the biggest aha moments was that through my effort and through my natural strengths and through my ability to work on myself and reflect and try harder the next day, that no one else got me to where I was but me.
Mm.
And if you go all the way back to the beginning when I was talking about musical theater, it's a very vulnerable place to be the lead in a play.
Yeah.
Right? You are up for criticism. You are singing on a stage for thousands of people. And you are putting yourself out there. You are giving it your best. It's a creative outlet, all that. But I was very reliant back then because I was a kid on my amazing coaches and voice teachers and choreographers and all that to say, did I do a good job? Did I do a good job? Right. And I think the same happened to me throughout my leadership journey, throughout my career, was that I was so reliant on the validation from everybody around me to say, like, damn, you killed it, or really good job, like, you're doing amazing in this role, or, oh, that wasn't so good, that I wasn't just harnessing the natural courage and confidence that I also had in me. I was just listening to the other side much more. And I think the biggest thing that has happened is that I've now taken back my confidence to say, no, I will try the hardest I possibly can. I will bring energy wherever I am. I will attract people that I respect who respect me. I will do that thing because that's the energy I put out, not someone else putting it out for me.
Yeah.
Right? There's that like regaining, which before I would have seen as ego, and now I don't see it as that. I see that as like what I'm meant to do and be on this planet. And that is a gift that I will never take for granted. So I will choose where to put my energy now instead of someone else choosing that for me. And where I put that energy will get the best out of other people too, in turn. So that like taking back control over your life from all angles was just the number one thing that helped me throughout this whole thing, and not feeling guilty about that. Not feeling bad about that, not feeling bad about getting on the treadmill at 4:30 if I needed a break from like really hard stacks of conversations. It's like I used to see that as a bad thing because we prioritized meetings were how we saw our value. And it's like, that's not the truth. Like how you show up to meetings are of value.
Yeah.
And whatever it is that you need to be the best person, to show up in the right way, in a kind, respectful, wonderful way, then that's what you need to do and prioritize as a leader. Because like you said, like it is very lonely, the more senior you get in your career. And that work has to be done by yourself.
Well, and why is it lonely at the top? Because when you get together with another couple or a couple couples and everybody's catching up and you think about in your day-to-day the things you had to handle and the amount of responsibility you have of people, of salaries, of jobs, of opportunity, unless you have like-minded friends in your circle that also deal with that too, you also don't want to share too much. So when everyone's like, Steve, how's work? If I, talk about XYZ is, whatever it may be, but it doesn't resonate with you. I think also just not having people in your circle that understand the weight or the pressure of what you deal with versus, I'm not saying just a 9-to-5 job or what have you, but for somebody who may not be in that same realm, having mentors, having people, others that you can talk to, that you can learn from, that you can glean from. And I think even too, just mindsets, right? It's so easy to say like taking things back. And I totally love that. But has there been anything from a practical standpoint, whether it's planning, whether it's journaling, whether it's just a way of doing things, like has there been anything that's like help you begin to put those things in motions or reset quickly if you have to?
So there was, I had this wonderful leadership coach along the way. And one of the things that she helped me with, like you were talking about how emotions can kind of steer you wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in the thick of like a work crisis, emotions are a big part of like managing and balancing that. So one of the tactics that she had taught me was like, after you feel a certain emotion, like it's an extreme emotion, like you're hurt by something or you feel disrespected or like something that's an extreme, not all the time, but when it feels like that, write down that emotion and what happened and why as a way to get it out and just release the emotion so that it doesn't cloud how you interact the next interaction, because those will just keep building throughout the day. So that I was like, yeah, right. This is not going to work for me, right? And as soon as I started doing it, I instantly felt better. It got me through some of those really hard days. And then I can look back at some of those responses and say, wow, I didn't see that I was so unhappy.
Yeah.
Like now looking back on it, I see that version of me. So I almost am more appreciative of having written it down. But in the moment, it helped me process things like immediately for myself, but without it damaging any of the relationships that I was building.
Yeah. And even practically, right? If you're in marketing and you develop a strategy or a plan for rolling out a new campaign and you start to check metrics and how is it performing, if it's not doing what the set objective was, you might make tweaks to the campaign or do things differently to try to get a response from it. When you're in your day-to-day job, we do that with what we're paid to do, which is the analytics to look at things, see how they're doing. But we don't always apply that same mindset to parenting or to loving our spouse, where when we blew an opportunity or it's not, maybe our kids aren't responding the way that we had hoped, even though we've tried to model it, taking the time to really think about, is it something that I'm doing? Is it the way that they're learning like we would with our job? And I think what's really helped my wife and I is, again, you have parts of you that come out when you're a parent that you were like, I never would have thought I would have responded that way or had those thoughts. And sometimes you find yourself raising your voice at your kids in a way that you didn't mean to. And what's really helped me is thinking about where thoughts came from and thinking about the emotions that I was feeling and like, why was that there? Was it really because, one of my kids spilled juice on the table that I kind of went off the hinges? Or was there something in my day or something between my wife and I that I haven't yet dealt with or addressed? And this is just a manifestation of just one more thing that was the light in the powder keg. And so for me personally, journaling has been a massive blessing in my life, writing down my own thoughts, thinking about things, but learning to really, and I can be standing with you in a room, but just in that moment in my mind, going backwards and being like, why did I just say that? Like, where did that come from? So I love that idea of almost thinking about your thoughts and trying to think through those emotions can be the difference. Again, why? Between somebody actually having real life response change and somebody else just saying, well, that's just the way I am, and spending the rest of their life kind of in this almost victim mentality of wondering why the promotion never came, why they're never offered more in life. And it's probably because you haven't taken ownership of your own thoughts, your own emotions, the way you say things, where you are today as a leader in 2023 compared to where you were 5, 10, 15 years ago. I would imagine that you've made some pretty big, evolutions in your career.
You can't even imagine when you actually start doing the work on yourself and stop blaming it on everybody else. It's amazing what you can accomplish. But just going back to that specific things, I'm like, as you're talking, I'm just reflecting on some of the little nuances that have been just so huge in both of my relationship with my husband and just like being able to prioritize mental health and the whole life balance that we've been talking about. One thing we started to do this past year way more intentionally than we ever did before was when we are starting to get that short fuse and we see it in somebody else, in the other person. The kids are at it with us. Everybody's barking at each other. We're snipping about stupid little things that like we don't care about, but you're just egregiously angry for no reason, right? We all get that way because parenting is hard AF. Hence your other topic about it. You could probably do an entire podcast about that.
Yep.
But one thing we do for each other, my husband and I, is look at each other and just say, just go work out, go for a run for like 30 minutes. Go in the basement, go on the Peloton for a little bit. Like you deserve it. You've been watching the kids all morning or they're getting at your nerves. Just go do you for a minute and not making them feel bad about that. And then the other person accepts the opportunity.
Yeah.
They don't, woe is me it. They don't, this just happened to me the other day where I was like irrationally mad about my kids doing something. And he was like, let me just go take them off your hair. We'll go out of your hair. We'll go to the store. Mom gets an hour to herself. Just go do workout, do whatever it is that's on your mind. Because he knew I was stressed about all sorts of stuff, back to school, whatever. And I did. Instead of being like, no, I'll come with you. right? Like all woe is me martyrdom. It's like, no, accept the love that your support system, your biggest support system is giving you. And when they come home, or when you're done with that workout, you will be an exceptionally better parent for it, a better spouse for it. So those little things have just like flourished like our at-home environment and like the way we feel about ourselves and each other.
And I think when you listen to a podcast, yes, I do know that there are couples, friends of ours that will watch this together as a couple. But a lot of times it's you alone in your journey listening to a podcast, trying to receive the information. And then your mind begins to race about like, how can I apply this to not only my life as an individual, but you talked about layers. Myself as an individual, myself and my spouse, and now me and my kids. Like, how can I apply everything I just learned in this episode from Allison and become the best version of myself? But if your spouse isn't listening to it, that's a great concept of taking time to kind of unwind. One way that you may be able to initiate this is because you've heard this episode, give it away first, right? If you just pull your spouses out tonight and say, hey, I when things happen, I'm going to need 30 minutes to get away, right? They're going to be like, you need what? Because they have not been listening to this. But the next time a situation arises, even if you even feel like you need a break, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but it's been my experience as a parent, and it kind of goes into this. When you are in the thick of it, I found that sometimes I can't wait to take a nap or to rest. And then you finally get to have time to nap or rest and you can't sleep at all. And it's just this like cycle of sometimes the things we tell ourselves we need, we can't actually enjoy. So if you're trying to do what Allison talked about, if you find that you're in the thick of it with your spouse, with your kids, whatever, offer to them, hey, why don't you take 30 minutes out and see how they feel? And when they come back and they're like, man, how did you know I need that? You can tell them about the One Big Thing podcast. But I think many times I have found in my own personal life, I have to give away the thing that I probably need more than anybody, because when I learn to give away what I need, it always comes back to me tenfold. So I love that you and your spouse have initiated that kind of thing of creating space for each other, because you totally can feel that way. My wife and I will talk about it all the time. I take my kids to Sam's Club. That's my safe haven. When my wife needs time, let my kids run around the big warehouse. But, it's easy sometimes to have guilt as a spouse because you're both carrying, different responsibilities. Say, I'll come with you. But I think even you just giving the listener permission to realize, like, if it's offered, as long as it's agreed upon that this is something you're going to do. And maybe that's where a good starting point is. I think sometimes we try to get ambitious and try new things without ever first talking through like, hey, maybe this is something we can do. So the moment arises, you're in the thick of it and you're like, hey, go take 30 minutes. But you two have never talked about like why you're going to do that. My wife will be like, no, like I'm just going to come with you because I haven't talked about it. So maybe even a good starting point, maybe for you, it's not 30 minutes on a bike or working out, but like, hey, when we get into the middle of it, because we want our kids to see the best versions of us and not be terrified of us or feel like mom and dad let me down, is there something that we could do within our resources, our time, and our capacity that would make you feel like if you got 30 minutes to yourself and came back, you'd feel fully present and fully alive? And like, what would that look like? Have a ground floor intentional conversation about those things so that when that moment comes, neither one of you are caught off guard.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is part of what we've done. We've talked about the need to do this for each other when we're not in the thick of the moment, when we're not in the heat of the emotion. And there's another piece of this is the delivery of, hey, you need 30 minutes, and the receipt of, hey, you need 30 minutes. So the delivery has to be in that calm, supportive tone instead of go take 30 minutes is different than, why don't you go take 30 minutes? I got the kids. It's the same words, but means so many different things to that person. And when you receive that, hey, take 30 minutes, I got you. You're doing a good job. You just need a break. That's all. If you receive that as like, oh, I need 30 minutes, right? What? Right? And you don't take it as help. What's that going to do the next time you really do need 30 minutes, right? Like you have to be willing to work on like this entire time we've been talking about, like work on yourself, work on your own reactions, and work on how you put that energy out into whatever conversation you're having, especially this. run. And it's magic. It works every single time. At least for us, it works every single time when we say, go for a run. You get a run, and then I'll come when you come back, I'll go back out. And that like planning out, like you're talking about, kind of like talking about it ahead of time before the emotions get high, has just done wonders for like how present we are with our kids and how happy we are when we're there.
Well, it's so important too, because I know a lot of young couples our age that struggle with things like babysitters or mom and dad helping out. Because the more kids you have, the harder it is for your parents to really like want to jump in. Right. And so if you are somebody who haven't had a date night in a long time, you don't have that help outside of your family, totally get it. But that doesn't mean for years of your life, you can never take time out for yourself. And maybe this is one small practical thing that you two can do, knowing that maybe help is not coming from out somewhere else. And that's kind of what we've talked about in this episode. We can feel bad for ourselves for things that we actually have the control over, whether we do it or not. You can feel bad that you don't have sitters or parents that are involved in helping you with your kids. But if you're married, you have somebody else that can help each other. And so just making sure that you guys set a value or priority in your marriage that help not be coming from outside this home, but go take 30 minutes. When you come back, I'll go. Now you're beginning to do things in tandem together. And one thing that I wanted to circle back through that you said, and I had made a note here, because it also delves into with our kids too as well. When you are in leadership and you are somebody of significance in a company and people look to you, one of the reasons it's also very lonely is because you have to be very careful about how much personal information you share about your journey with your colleagues or people that are under you. You know, you can be in leadership, but still trying to figure out what in the world you're doing yourself, but you can never let that come off to your staff. You have to be confident. And it's not like you can unload in a sensitive way to your staff and be like, I really don't know what I'm doing, or I'm trying to figure this out, because they're not at the same level than you. And that can create an isolation in the same way I was just thinking about with our kids. If you are married, you have to be very mindful of what you say about your spouse in front of your kids. Even in joking, even in sarcasm, our kids are like sponges. And if you and I were married and you came into a room hot and tempered and, snobby, and I said something to you and you gave me attitude, and in front of my kids, I said, oh, mommy's a little off today. Mm-hmm. If we're not careful, that is where the seeds of distrust can come in, because I know my kids, they will feed off of whatever parent is like taking the lead in sarcasm. And if I say anything about like, oh, mommy needs a break today, my kids will almost like team up against her and be like, yeah, mommy, go take a break, which then makes that parent feel absolutely awful. So I think we need to be very mindful of not having conversations behind closed doors with our spouse, but being very careful, even with our in-laws, with other people, about how we talk about our spouse, both when they're with us and when they're not, because it's what we say that can really affect that relationship. And kids are our greatest listeners every single day. So just even like, I don't know if you guys have ever had to work through that, but I've had to catch myself sometimes bringing comedy into a room and keeping it lighthearted, almost at the sake of the other person, by, if I'm not careful, saying something that could be undercutting or undermining, where it's like, man, this really isn't helping the situation. And so just being careful.
What I hear in this story is, in leadership, two different things. One is having that person's back in the room and being respectful of that person and how you talk to them, and not blurring the lines of friendship and professionalism. That's a really hard lesson to learn as you're young and aspiring in your career.
Yeah.
Maybe you were someone's peer before, and then all of a sudden you're now their boss, or now you're above that. That is a really hard life. That could be its own topic. It's a really hard thing to go through that I personally went through, and I've seen a lot of young aspiring leaders struggle with that. That's one thing. The other part, though, where you were saying, like, leaders shouldn't let their teams in on that they don't know how to do the thing, and they don't know what they're doing and stuff like that. What I have found is, when we pretend as leaders like we have all the answers,
Yep.
all that does is shut out the people around us. But when I have coached leaders or myself to be my authentic self, you can still do that and say, you know what? We have a really complex problem on our hands. Here's the lay of the land. I need your help figuring this out. I can't figure this out by myself. That is a different way of saying, I don't know what the F I'm doing. Even if you feel like that's the case, what it is saying is, this is really hard. And I also believe that with this group of people in this room, we can figure this thing out together. And I don't have all the answers. It brings you down to that vulnerable level that welcomes other people's ideas and input in who very well have the solution. So I just wanted to clarify that piece of it, because I think sometimes it's where we get blinded as leaders and thinking, oh, well, I'm this title, therefore I must have the answer. And it's actually the opposite. Your job becomes getting the best answer out of the team around you.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we can even apply that to our own personal lives. I think it's easy sometimes too with our spouse or significant other to act like we know what to do in every situation. But to be honest, we're thrust in our 30s and 40s into situations that no one ever prepared us through. Just disciplining your children. What does that look like? How we spend money. What does
the search like? What do I do?
Yeah, well, how we spend money, how we have conversations. Some of us were raised in healthy, communicative families. Some of us came from families where you slammed doors and screamed at each other. And so even learning how to bring your spouse into those same types of conversations where, again, you can just be honest and say like, hey, I know I run the finances for our family, or I know that you expect me to be able to do this or whatever. But I got to tell you, I need your help. Here's the situation. Like, I want you to be a part of this. Learning how to invite people in to a scenario without offloading it on them, but learning how to bring them into a conversation. There's so many leadership principles that we can learn in our day-to-day lives with our wives, with our husbands, with our kids. That is the greatest breeding ground for leadership kind of out in the marketplace that any of us could ever learn.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, what a great conversation today, as we have covered the entire world of our lives, from training for a half marathon. We've talked about your journey in leadership, but you've also gave us the practical insights to being a mom, being a spouse, things you learned about yourself that were both exciting yet painful. You gave us some practical takeaways, and this is probably the most fun that I have on these episodes, the segment that we call Start, Stop, Continue, which is what I hear from all of you is your favorite part too as well. So if you're not familiar with the One Big Thing podcast, maybe you're here, which round of applause for Allison being an amazing guest today, to her network, friends, family. I conclude every episode with what I call Start, Stop, Continue. Every guest shares something that they want to start doing, something that they want to stop doing, and something that they want to continue doing. So we're going to hear from Allison, but this is a super practical if you're a journaler or you just get a cup of coffee by yourself. Do start, stop, continue. It's pretty revealing what you actually think about when you think about these things. So whatever order you want to take them in, just hit us with whatever the phrase is and then what you want to do with it.
So to start, I need to start waking up before my kids wake up. When I get woken up by my kids or by a blaring alarm when my kids are like right out the door, I'm very grumpy. It just is what it is, because I don't have the time to be productive and get my stuff together for the day, or time to myself, or organize a to-do list. So waking up before my kids and actually listening to my alarm clock would be a fantastic thing to start doing.
It.
Stop. So I have two stops.
Okay.
So the first stop is very simple. Stop apologizing when an apology is not needed. I think is a female leadership thing. I see it a lot in female leaders at work, where we lead with, I'm sorry, when you just ask somebody to move something, right? You move the meeting because it doesn't work for you. Stop saying I'm sorry. That's just a part of you prioritizing you in your day. It's okay. Save the I'm sorries for when you actually are sorry, when you're in the wrong. My second stop is just feeling so guilty at all times about not being a picture perfect mom, and realize that social media is not real. And that it's a journey, and you're going to have amazing days where you are the best mom, and you are going to have horrible days where you feel like the worst mom, but are you giving it your best effort? So as long as I can answer yes to that, I need to stop feeling guilty all the time.
Okay.
And my continue is this idea of prioritizing all aspects of my life that make me happy, not just work first all the time, but especially above all, prioritizing scheduling date nights. I'm putting that in continue because we are actually very, very good at that. I have like my entire fall planned out with my wonderful babysitters. Yeah. So I take the lead on that. That is my thing. And my husband plans the actual dates, but it is something that we look forward to. It makes us feel like us. It makes us feel like we're dating all the time. And we love the fact that our kids say, oh, is it mommy and daddy's date night? Because we do it on a consistent day of the week. So I love that little thing that we have. So definitely a continue.
So this is what I love about Start, Stop, and Continue is sometimes the last 4 to 5 minutes are the most revealing part of this conversation. And I know we haven't had a ton of leading up to this show, but just the simple fact that you're thinking along the lines that you are reveals that you're a great mom. Right. And that's part of it is we got to have grace for all of us, that it's one thing to continually blow it and never acknowledge it and think you're better than you are. It's also another thing to blow it and to self-reflect and be like, man, I don't want that to happen again. And again, what I love about this show, about this platform is we've had guests that are further along in the journey than we are, that are sharing backwards. We've had people that are earlier in the journey that are kind of where they're at. And then you have people right in the thick of it. And I think the hardest part is to have a long-term view of your life, your legacy, and the impact that you want to have, not only on the people that report to you at work, but the children that you have with your spouse, to really truly understand that someday your children, my children, will go off and marry other people, and they will have kids, and they will have kids, and they will have kids. In the things that we all deal with as grown adults now, attitudes, emotions, we're not sure where they came from. Many of them stem from our upbringing and things that we saw modeled before us. And so learning that if there are some ugly parts of who you are as a person at this stage of your life, it's better to admit it and try to work on it than to turn a blind eye, say that's just how I am, and be a victim the rest of your life versus, man, there's some ugly things that come out of me. I don't know where they came from. And maybe I need a friend I can talk to, my spouse, what have you. But I think even just for you, Allison, understanding of not living with that guilt, you're aware of things you should be aware of. And I had said on one of my episodes, life is not about perfection. It's about progress. I got to imagine you're a better mom at this stage that you are now. And maybe it's because you're carving a time out for you and your husband on date nights. Maybe it's because you guys are setting these 30 minutes aside each time. You're not just going to become a better parent spouse overnight. There are, just like in your business, you can't just do one thing one time and expect success. It takes tweaking. It takes looking back at it. What did we do wrong? Did we release the social ad at the wrong time? Did we title it wrong? Was the execution, was the branding, was the visual wrong? We do that in our day-to-day jobs. Imagine if we did that in our own lives as people, as spouses with our kids. So I loved how incredibly open you were in this conversation, especially as somebody leading from the front. As I said, Allison is an absolute boss. If you want to, she's a thought leader, especially in the marketing space. If you're a LinkedIn user, which I know a lot of our listeners are, obviously we'll have her contact information in the show notes. She said that she's willing to connect with anybody that could use help because she's fierce in our industry. But I think what you've realized in this episode, if you've made it all the way to this point, if you didn't know Allison from the next person and you just saw her LinkedIn profile and all the accolades and all the career accomplishments, it would be very easy to feel very disconnected from her because you may not realize there's days she blows it as a mom. There's days she doesn't feel like running. There's days she messes up with her husband. We're all human beings. We're all real. And that's the purpose of this show, is to bring you real people that really want to share with you practical insights that have helped him hopefully become the best version of ourselves, realizing that we're all still growing and evolving. So, Allison, thank you for being on the One Big Thing podcast. For those that are listening, don't forget you can head over to NQR YouTube channel. That's NQR YouTube, and watch this episode if you're a family or friend. But the One Big Thing is also available on all major podcast platforms. Would love for this not to be your last stop, so you can subscribe, leave a rating, leave a review, talk about how great Allison did. But you did a masterful job, my friend. So I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a joy talking to you, and appreciate the time just to break out of the day-to-day and reflect a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, everybody go take 30 minutes with your spouse. Until next time, thanks for stopping by.